Hello and welcome to this week's episode. It's great to have you here. This week I'm excited to share my conversation with co-founder of Now Teach, Katie Waldegrave. Now, you know as well as I do that our working patterns are shifting. No longer do we leave school or university, choose a career and probably a company and stay with them for our whole working life. People move around a lot more, not only between companies but also careers. This was the theme of my fascinating conversation with Professor Andrew J. Scott, who's the author of The 100-Year Life, who was on the podcast a few months ago. I'll put a link in the show notes if you missed that episode and would like to listen. Katie and her organisation want to capitalise upon this trend and encourage more experienced people into teaching. Teaching is a polarising career. From my experience and the people I know, you are likely to either feel a natural instinct to want to teach or have a fear of the profession. I know that the homeschooling forced upon so many parents by the COVID-19 pandemic certainly engendered a newfound respect for teachers. My wife Kathy can vouch for that. In our conversation, Katie explains how Now Teach aims to bring experienced people not ready to completely retire into the classroom. She believes Now Teach has a role to play in tackling the teacher recruitment crisis. But more importantly, Katie explains the enormous benefits for teachers and pupils alike for sharing of wisdom, their experience of the world and a perspective that comes with age. We chat about how the process works, what makes an ideal teacher, and the benefits of a career change later in life. So if you've ever considered a second or maybe a third or fourth career, this episode is for you. I hope you feel inspired by my conversation with Katie Waldegrave. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast, Katie Waldegrave.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, Katie, you've got an organisation called Now Teach, which is why we're chatting this afternoon. Tell me about Now Teach.
Perfect. Well, Now Teach is an education charity. I started it with Lucy Kellaway, the ST journalist, who you probably know about. In fact, I can say almost exactly 6 years ago, because we met just after I'd had twins. They were tiny wee things, a couple of months old, and I was craving adult conversation, and she was thinking of becoming, at the age of about 57 then, a teacher, and wanted to speak to someone who'd been a teacher. And we had an introduction, and I thought, hurrah, let's talk to somebody. And she came in the morning and she stayed all day, and I think that by the time she left, Now Teach had been born. So in a way, I sort of felt like I had triplets, and Now Teach was one of them at the same time. But one of the things that kind of drew us together when we were sitting there holding a little baby in each hand was that we'd both read Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan's 100-Year Life. I don't know, you probably know it well.
He's been on our podcast.
Of course he has. So, he is to the extent that we have anything so highfalutin as a foundational text, it's probably that. He is the Bible. And one of the things we were talking about was that, these tiny little things born in 2016, their working life and education and all the rest of it, I think they're apparently both more likely to live to 100 than not. And that's going to profoundly change our relationship with work and education and when we do which and for how long. Anyway, so we thought she probably couldn't be the only insane person in the world who was prepared at that sort of stage to jack it all in, something she was brilliant at, and start all over again, to be useful, in her words, And I think we made lots of mistakes along the way, but I think in that key insight, we were right, and we hit something of a zeitgeist, which has probably only been compounded by COVID, which is to say that there is something, perhaps at the stage when your children move out, or perhaps at a stage of a key relationship shift, or a lot of different stages for different people, where you look to wanting different things out of your career, and teaching could be one of them, as a sense of giving back and return to your community and so on. Anyway, so we gave birth, as it were, to Now Teach in 2016. The first teachers joined us in 2017, and we've gone on since.
So, Katie, you obviously, I think you mentioned a second ago that you got some background in teaching. Tell me a kind of, how did you get into that, and what did you do, and where did all this progress to this culmination of Now Teach?
So I started as a teacher with Teach First in its first year 100 years ago in 2003, and I taught for about 5 years in a reasonably challenging school in West London, just under the runway of Heathrow, actually, which was great, and I loved it. And just at the time that I was, as I was doing that, I started what became a charity, First Story, which was all about writers in residence, creative writing in schools. And I took a bit of a leap of faith and thought, I'll give it a go for a year. I was writing a book, doing various things, and thought, well, let's see if this has any legs. And it seemed to. It continues, and it's grown and do much better than when I ran it. But it's about putting writers, real serious grown-up writers, into some of the more challenging schools, just like private schools seem to have this kind of thing all over the place, and publishing children's work, giving voices to those voices that might not otherwise be heard. And that was great. I did that till about 2000. Must have been about 2014 or 15, I forget, I've lost track of time. And then, so whilst I wasn't teaching, and I never really meant to quit, I still at least was in and out of schools the whole time. And then went off to India actually for a couple of years, came back to have the babies, and then met Lucy. And so here I am.
Wow. What a story. What a whirlwind. So for those who don't know it, tell me about First Teach.
First Story.
First Story, sorry.
First Story. So it's quite a simple concept, really. We match up writers to schools in their local area. In a funny way, I think it probably gives me a lot of what I realize people, there's crossover between them. But this is about matching writers to localish schools where they go in once a week, they become writing residents, they work with different groups of students, they publish anthologies of their writing, they have little book launches, we now have big festival and so on. And I mean, I love it. And funny, if it's only with a bit of distance that I can look at it and think, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. When you're in it, you're too close to the whole thing. And it continues to say it works in lots of challenging schools up and down the country. But there was something that the writers valued, which I think is not a million miles from what the now teachers value, which is to say, if you're a writer, you typically live quite a lot in your own head and sort of, not completely certain you're being useful every minute of every day when you're thinking your writerly thoughts, but actually being in a school, being in a community that is local to you, working with children who are exciting, mad, wonderful, not always easy, but always interesting. I think something that those writers got out of it is actually something very similar to that drives now teachers to belong, to be useful is important for all of us.
Mm. So coming round then to Now Teach, the new baby, which by the way, how old is Now Teach now?
Well, the twins are 6, so it's 6 and a bit.
6 and a bit, fantastic. Yeah. And how's the organisation set up? And I appreciate with Lucy that she came to you, we're having this conversation about I think I'd like to get into teaching at 57. I think you said. Yeah. Some people will have that idea. Some people won't have that idea. Yeah. It'll be the furthest thing that they could even possibly be thinking of. But how are you introducing this idea to people who may not have the idea, but that this could be something that they should consider, and why should they consider it?
Well, I think how we introduced it then and how we introduced it now remain quite similar. The first is simply, mostly when people are in touch with us, they sort of still often assume that they maybe can't, that perhaps there's a forced retirement age at some point, or no school would ever want them, or no, there's a strong perception that it's probably not possible in some way. It depends a little on the person's age, and so I suppose a big thing is simply saying this is not only possible, this would be desirable to the education sector. So making something of course, it would be ridiculous to suggest there haven't been career changes into teaching. There always have been some people but I think they were always kind of countercultural, if you like. And what was interesting and important to me was they had vastly higher dropout rates than younger teachers. Teachers doesn't have a good retention rate anyway. Younger teachers don't, across the board we don't, but particularly people going into it at an older age, at a later stage. And there are lots of reasons for that, but we wanted to be sure that if we were to try and bring people in, we could help keep them in. Otherwise, what would be the point? So we're very proud of the retention rates that we have, which are great. But I suppose what we were saying to people was that there is a network to do it with, and by making it a peer network, these are a group of people, you give it a bit of status, the Lucy effect a little bit, it's that thing that's something to do with the FT, it's important, I think, for people to do things and not feel entirely like they're going to be out of step with where they're going, that they're going to have a network. So we tried to make it more normal. And the message is, the broad, simple message has been, we need more great people in teaching, and perhaps consider it. What's been interesting and surprising is how many people want to consider, or already have considered it. I feel like maybe my pet theory is the world is divided into people who have got a book in them and people who want to be a teacher, and that covers everything. That so many people say, well, everyone's always said I should be a teacher, or my so-and-so used to say I should be a teacher, but for whatever reason, they'd ruled it out. And this helps them to rule it back in again.
Yeah. Now, to someone who doesn't know, and I really don't know, what level of qualifications does someone need to, let's say Lucy, she's been working as a journalist for a number of years. She's obviously educated, experienced, had a career to a high level. I presume that doesn't make you an automatic kind of shoe-in for being a teacher.
Nope, it definitely doesn't. And I think, one of the perceptions I suppose we wanted to correct early on was the idea that we thought that just because you'd been a great journalist, you'd be a great teacher. Clearly not. But if you have been really good at one profession and you are qualified, then you really want to do this other profession, there's a good chance, if you're driven by the right reasons, that you might be good at it. So in terms of practical things, to be a teacher in this country, you need to have a degree. Occasionally I'm frustrated by that, because you meet great people who you'd like to say, they clearly have a degree of recruitment. Anyway, there's a statutory thing, you need a degree, and it needs to be the majority in the subject you propose to teach, or a significant part. Mostly that's simple, you did a degree in English, teach English, but actually it's not quite as simple as that. There's normally a bit more flex and scope around the subjects you should qualify in. And in fact, once you qualify as a teacher, you are then qualified. So I'm a qualified history teacher, but if anyone were foolish enough, they could employ me as a chemistry teacher, and that's sort of legal, as it were. So quite a lot of our now teachers, Lucy included, qualified in one subject, might teach another. So she qualified in maths, but also teaches physics, economics. I'm going mad. Because obviously her background as a financial journalist, that makes huge sense. So yeah. You need a degree, you need a degree of, there are maths and literacy tests you need to pass and so on. And then you need the right attitude, I suppose, the desire. You need to like young people, you need to want to work with young people, you have to have incredible grit. It's tough, it's incredibly hard work. It's enormously rewarding. But it is hard. So, it's not for the sort of, we always get a few inquiries from people really who want to do a little bit of volunteering somewhere or do it, and that's not, it's a full-on career change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So I'm thinking that I've got my degree many, many years ago. I've got quite a lot of experience in the field that I've been working with. What do I do next?
So you talk to us, and after this I shall hand you and send you emails. But you talk to us, and we talk you through your various different options. One of the things that is true about teaching and getting into teaching is it's ridiculously complicated. The whole system is, there are lots and lots of different routes in. So we help you navigate that. And you might be the kind of person who would like to go back to university at a more university-based route where you'll be in schools, but you might want to actually do it very much as a school-based training. It might be very important you stay local to your current house and family, or actually you might be up for longer commute if it took you to a particularly disadvantaged area or a particularly something or other area. So we figure out who you are and what you would need, and we help you understand if it would be right for you. I guess, to be brutal about it, we try quite hard to put you off, and if we can't, then you're definitely right, if you see what I mean. We want to, not really, but you know what I mean. We're not going to pull any punches about what it is or isn't, but equally we'll open up the kind of lots of insight events, lots of talking to other people who've made the change, and try and kind of guide you through that process. And the minute you're kind of persuaded it's the right thing to do and right for you, then introduce you to a kind of peer network of people who'll be doing both going through it at the same time as you, but also access to all the people who've gone before in whichever subject you have elected to teach and in whichever school or area of the country you're in.
Sure. So, is there further kind of training that you need to do? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
what actually happens? So I come along to you, I say, I'm quitting being a financial planner. I've got a degree tucked in my back pocket. I don't know what that would qualify me to teach, but
What did
possibly,
you
let's business studies. Let's say I could I'm qualified to teach business studies. But what do I actually need to do? I mean, I've joined you, but what do I need to do next? Do I need some further qualifications? How does it work?
Yeah, so once you've decided what you're going to teach, which might be business studies, although that can be tricky to qualify in, but that's a technicality we can come back to when we get there. What you do is it's a year's teacher training. So for 1 year,
Right.
you are fully a trainee, and depending on which subject you teach, you're either in receipt of a government bursary or perhaps not. But it's like doing any other postgraduate degree
Right.
essentially, from that sort of practical and financial point of view. And depending on the route, you may feel actually from the start pretty much like you're a teacher. You're in a school from the beginning. The school is sort of your training provider. You feel like you're attached to school, or you may be based more in a university doing placements out. But in the end, either way, you get a degree of not a degree. You get a certain level of both experience in the school and in the classroom setting and teaching, and experience outside of the classroom, understanding sort of theory and practice and so on. And at the end of that 1 year, you are given something called QTS, qualified teacher status, which is your sort of driving license, as it were, or at least your provisional license. You may also do a degree, a PGCE, post-degree qualification. Not essential, but depending on who you are, might be the right move, or where you do it. You get your piece of paper, and then you have 2 further years where you are, as it were, on a provisional license. You're basically employed as a teacher, but you have a slightly lower teaching load and an entitlement to a degree of support and continued sort of ongoing training. And you technically have to be signed to, you've passed that period of time. But at that stage, you are employed in a school, and so the students would know no different.
So in the first year, whilst you're not being paid,
You're not being paid. You may be in receipt of a bursary, which are kind of graduated depending on how severe the shortage of teachers is in your subject. So if
right?
you're a computer scientist teacher, for example, computer science teacher, you will receive a bigger bursary than if you are a history teacher, who we have more of.
Right. Okay. And you help people guide through all this kind of the
Exactly.
hoops and the hoops that they need to jump through to work
Exactly.
out what they're going to teach and where they're going to teach, and give them the support for that.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
And to your point, some of the kind of financial sort of guidance and support that come into that, which typically is different than if you are 23. That, not that you don't, everyone needs financial guidance, but it may look different at that stage of life.
And so, how is this different, I suppose, to people just wanting to enter teaching directly from university?
How is which different? How is what they
Well,
can offer different?
do you help people newly qualified, people who've just left further education to think, this is what I
No,
want to be, or is it only for second careers?
it's only for second careers. And whilst, I think it would be age discriminatory to say you have to be over X age, and it isn't really about age, it is about experience and sort of length of service almost, or length the length of time you've spent in another career. We don't think of ourselves as being what I think some in the industry refer to as career bouncers. So these aren't people who've done a few years as a lawyer or something and decided it's not for them. These are people who've had full proper careers, and for whatever reason are thinking about a big shift. So our average person is sort of early 50s. It varies a bit each year, but I think that's about right. But the range goes from sort of early 40s. I think we've had a few in their 30s up to, we've had the odd over 70, and I'd like to get more. I want to get an octogenarian really doing it and prove it can be done. But that the average is sort of 50-ish. And I think when Lucy started, she she's in that category of people where a generation or two ago at 57, you think, well, I'm not that far off retirement. I'll just sort of potter along for a bit. And now that's neither feasible nor desirable. I think, if she wants to be like you, like everybody, she can be working for at least another 20 years. She's apart from my mother, she's the most energetic person I've ever met. So the idea of her sort of retiring is a nonsense. So yeah, I think for a lot of people, they come to stage thinking, I've enjoyed my career, I've been good at it, but not sure I'm learning anything anymore. Not sure I'm going to get any better. I'm not wildly excited about the idea of doing this 20 years from now.
Katie, I speak to a few teachers. I've got a few friends who are teachers,
Yep.
and it's tough. It's bloody tough. I mean, they're not. Then I don't hear any of them saying, what an easy ride it is. I mean, it's a tough old gig. Why would you do it?
Because it is also the most wonderful gig. I mean, I think that whenever you talk to teachers, I mean, as I said, I didn't really mean to give up, and I miss it desperately still. I miss the relationships I had with those classes, and I assume at some point I will go back to teaching. It is a tough gig, and I wouldn't for a second sugarcoat that to anybody. It gets easier, but it's an incredibly hard thing to start. And, COVID's been tough. The last few years have been tough. Everybody, but teachers have struggled just to be all the things I suppose they need to be, or are asked to be. But I think the thing that I have never experienced in teaching, and don't really expect to outside of teaching, given I'm not a doctor, is knowing that every day I'm being useful. I am necessary. I am probably not doing it well enough, but I am doing something that will matter to a child. I have the potential to improve the young person's outcomes, and in a less sort of, OTT sort of grandiose kind of a way, that I laugh a lot. I mean, it's full on. Young people are funny and energetic and difficult often, of course, and sometimes annoying or whatever else it might be. But it's sort of complete and total. And you start teaching, and you get to school early, you start teaching at 8:30 or 9 or whatever it is, and you suddenly look up, it's 3:30 and you're desperate for a pee. You just don't kind of switch off in that time in between. And it's not for everybody, and it is really hard, and it needs to get easier. One of my hopes is that now teachers will think, with all their different ways of being in different workplaces, will be part of what contributes to just, different systems being tried or different things changing. But it is joyous, and it does matter. So I guess that's why.
Yeah, brilliant. I think it's a huge opportunity. What type of characteristics do you think do you find are the most successful going into this and staying with it, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if it's a characteristic exactly, but the single biggest thing has to be the desire to work with young people. The sort of excitement about that. Returning to one's subject, also being part of the local community, and most importantly, the sense of wanting to kind of know that you're being useful. People talk a lot about giving back and all of that, but it's real. That they've perhaps ticked off various other things they wanted to do in life in a sort of status sense or whatever else it might be, but actually what they need now from life is to know that they are adding value. So I suppose those are not perhaps characteristics, but drivers. But that sense that you want to be giving back, being useful, belonging in a community, fully engaged with it. I think in terms of characteristics, humility is key. It's really tough to go from being really good at something and probably reasonably near the top of the whatever you are, to being really bad at something, which everyone is when they start teaching, and right at the bottom. That's hard. It's all very well in theory saying you understand you'll be at the bottom, but actually, I remember one person saying to me, I knew we must have had a photocopier in my last workplace, but I had no idea where it was. And, every teacher, on the other hand, is there at 7 a.m. queuing up to get their photocopying done. It's really different. But those that love it talk about that very fact being kind of rejuvenating in a funny way, the sense that what you're responsible for in that first year is learning to be a good teacher, and you're not managing people, and you're not responsible for the whole business or whatever it might be that has been kind of weighing on you. What you are is learning, and failing and that stuff, but ultimately getting better at something. But yes, anyone who knows deep down that they would really just not be happy starting again, that's not right. And whilst love of subject is important, I think it's secondary to wanting to work with and for young people.
Absolutely. Well, I think I really enjoyed our conversation. I think this would be absolutely inspiring for so many people thinking, you know what, I've done my time at the mill, of whatever their mill is, and looking for some way of making a contribution back to society, and what better way could you have an impact on enthusing and empowering young people to have a better education and bringing along experience. And I always remember in my school years there were some teachers who had real life experience of doing what they were teaching, and I always felt quite invigorated by what they were saying. Whereas I do remember having the conversation with the business studies teacher at the time and going, but you've never run a business. I mean, and I appreciate that's not all what it's all about. But I did feel very, kind of like, well, there needs to be some real life experience of actually what you're teaching. Now, it may be more difficult if you're a history teacher of saying what the real life teaching experience you've got, or what have you. But I do remember, especially I think for one of my passions, which is sport, one of my early PE teachers was someone who'd played for the rugby, the Lions, the British Lions, and there was a huge kind of a respect there for that, and of course the stories he would tell and to empower and enthuse you to do it. And I think allowing people to bring that career experience into the classroom could be a huge benefit.
I think that's absolutely right. And it's not for a second suggesting that business teacher who doesn't have experience of running a business, as you say, is less, but there is a richness in having, multiple life experiences and stories in schools. And we have one of the youngest teaching populations in the OECD for getting career change, but it must be sort of richer and more, and what worked for you as a 15-year-old or whatever you were when you were challenging your business studies teacher would be different to the person who sat next to you. And so providing children with as many range of role models as possible it seems to me, must be sensible. And you say history teachers, but things like the fall of the Berlin Wall are on the curriculum now, and I think it is. I've talked to quite a lot of the history teachers talking about it to sort of blow the mind of forget the students, but of maybe a 25-year-old teacher to be hearing, talk about troubles in Ireland or whatever it might be that they are teaching, which comes from, I think that does also bring history alive, perhaps. So I agree. I think it's just really important to have, and in fact for those young teachers to work with older people. Intergenerational workplaces must be smarter workplaces. I think they have more different skills, and it sort of seems obvious to me that would be best. So
yeah, and I can imagine that the variety of opinion, from the staff room conversations to how the school should be run and administered, and made more attractive and more showing vitality by bringing in lots of different experience from people who've maybe worked in different organisations, could only enrich the environment of the education system.
Agreed. I don't think you couldn't be more right. And there's just, I'm excited in a way. This first stage, we're now our fifth cohort of teachers. Now, this first stage has in a way been all about proving that people can do it, they will do it, they will stay, they will be good. But in a longer term, once you have this growing network of people who can talk together about that, whether it's about bringing different ways of doing comms and PR, or what do you do if you have a whole room full of data scientists turned teachers, what did they observe about the way data is managed in schools and how it might be helped or improved? You're just bringing in outside skills and experiences. And I think I'm optimistic about the next few years as they go beyond being sort of early career teachers by stage, if not so much age, and into being more experienced teachers and what they will bring. Because it'll be interesting. I don't think they'll necessarily go up and think, I want to be the head teacher. I don't think that's the aspiration of most. Most want to sort of perhaps go sideways, squiggly career type approach to it, but bring in things from their former lives into their current lives. And I think that's going to be really exciting to see.
So, did you bring through a cohort at a certain point of time? Is there a time to enroll? Is there a time to get involved? How does it work?
Great question. So, teacher training typically starts in September. It's also possible to start in January, but 95% I think of ours start in September, and it takes the academic year to complete that QTS year. So, now actually April is a great time to be applying, but people can apply at any stage, but start generally the following September. And I think, the more leeway, that summer can be a great useful time for reading back up on the subject, doing courses which we can tell everyone about, and meeting their fellow cohort with us, but also with the training provider they're going to be in. And yeah, this is where, I don't know when this goes, but we're April now. This is kind of peak time, I suppose.
Brilliant. So, where can people find out more about you and Now Teach?
Well, thank you for asking. I would suggest they go to www.nowteach.org.uk and fill in a form, or just drop us a line, ring us up, anything, and we'd love to answer any questions anyone has, or tell them about they've got, and it's a slow burn for a lot of people. A conversation might not turn into a teaching career for several years to come. But I guess the thing is, if someone's been telling you, or you've been niggling away thinking, I could be a great teacher, don't ignore that. I will follow up this conversation with telling you just a little bit more about becoming a business studies teacher, for example.
Brilliant. Well, Katie Waldegrave from Now Teach, thank you so much for our conversation this afternoon. I hope you get a flood of inquiries from people interested in becoming a teacher for the first time. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you for yours.
A big thank you to Katie for sharing her story and the story of Now Teach with me. To find the show notes with links to the Now Teach website and their social platforms, head over to our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk. As ever, if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really does help more people like you find us. And for more interviews and retirement planning videos, you may want to check out my YouTube channel. Just search for Justin King MFP or click the link in the show notes. To connect, you can find me on Twitter at Justin King CFP, or drop me an email at hello@theretirementcafe.co.uk.